research, does it?
Yeah, opposition to migration in the UK has been high, at least for the last 5 decades. It doesn't matter in which part of the business cycle we are.
Gawain, Towler, is there a danger in trying to get across your arguments about immigration that they are, given that the majority of public opinion is actually with you? I mean, research indicates that 3/4 of the British public are actually in favour of reducing immigration. So the public seems to be with you. But is there a danger in getting across your argument that it's going to be received in a less nuanced way than perhaps you intended to?
Oddly, and going back to your introduction again, you said that in the case of the UK, one's often worried to even mention the question of migration because immediately the brickbats start flying. Funnily enough, I think it's getting a lot better. I think in the last few years, the debate has, some of the poison has been drawn from the debate. I think that one is able to query and question the figures, the debate, the discussion, far more rationally, far more reasonably than was ever the case in my lifetime, in my knowledge. As I say, so yes, that problem still arises. Yes, immediately one goes, maybe not that much. You get charged with this, that, and the other. However, that is not nearly as bad as it was even 3 years ago. I think a switch has been flipped, and people from across, I mean, when you're hearing people from the left of the Labour Party now saying, hold on, we've got to address this issue whether we like it or not. We need to make the arguments that Ceri was making just now on the benefits of migration, but doing it in a way that is comprehensible to ordinary people rather than the arrogant, migration is good, which was the traditional way of dealing with the discussion. And that can be engaged with in the debate is far, far better than it was.
Ceri Dingle, given the negative public attitude towards immigration and migration, how is it possible to turn that around?
Yes, I think so, very easily, in fact. I mean, I don't meet loads of people, and I think if you're out on the streets, and we're out on the streets all the time, taking the public seriously, and you don't meet loads of sort of xenophobic people at all. People are concerned because they are concerned about their jobs and their situation and all sorts of things like that, and in fact very welcoming to foreigners, very welcoming to migrants. And as soon as you put the clear arguments about the benefits of open borders and start talking to people, recognising that they're not just economic units or numbers, which is how they're seen by the government, ordinary people can relate to that and don't want their peers in Africa or from Eastern Europe or anywhere else to be treated differently to themselves. And I think there's a fine British tradition of treat people as you want to be treated. And, if we're going to use these polls and surveys, let's scratch the surface on them. And if they prove to be true, put the political arguments that challenge them. I think it's perfectly possible, but I don't think we've got the politicians with the vision to do it.
Just a reminder, you're listening to The Voice of Russia with me, Scott Craig, and today I'm discussing the issue of immigration in the UK with my guests Carlos Vargas-Silva, Gawain Towler and Ceri Dingle. Carlos Vargas-Silva, if we take the idea of open borders, for example, and just sort of look ahead, I mean, I've been reading the Office for National Statistics population projections anyway, which appear to show a fairly substantial increase in the UK population between now and 2035. It shows that by 2035, the UK population will reach about 73.2 million. Of which 47% are assumed to be net migrants. In terms of where we go from here, is there any evidence, first of all, on the question of open borders and what impact that might have on migration? But also, secondly, is the UK population in future likely, in your view, to grow at that level, or is it simply too hard to predict?
It is very, very hard to predict. That's why you have a lot of different predictions from the Office for National Statistics. Now, when you have migrants, it's not only the number of migrants that come into the country. Those migrants are also going to have a different fertility behavior. They're going to have children, different number of children than British households, and that is also going to have an impact of migration. So it is certainly possible that in a few years, in 20 or 30 years, we get to a number of 70 million people in the country or even more. Now, the key question in here is there an optimal level of population? So why is the number of 70 million that important? is there an optimal number? And if there is an optimal number, is that number 70 million, is 80 million, or maybe it's 50 million? We should promote people having less children. So instead of getting worried about how big the population is going to get, we should start by asking ourselves, is there an optimal level of population in the UK?
And how do we actually determine if there is one, and if so, what it is?
We will have to say, well, what is what we want for the future? Do we want to have families that are big? Do we want to just think in economic terms? So we have to make some trade-offs and think about what we want for the future. And if probably just looking at all those factors, we can come up with a number. But it may also be the case that it's impossible to come up with one. So there's no argument for having 70 million against 50 million.
Can I ask you, P.J. O'Rourke famously said, and he wasn't a left-winger, that, you know, if you took the whole world's population, you could squeeze it into a geographical area the size of former Yugoslavia, and you'd have the same density of population as you do in Manhattan today. And Manhattan's a pretty good place to live by all accounts. So why is it that there is this need to, you know, given there's plenty of rich countries that are highly dense, most densely populated in fact, why is it that we have to, you know, circumscribe freedom of movement and have this limit? Aren't we limiting what's possible when we do that?
Well, in some sense, there's no limit to population in the UK, so there's no policy related to population yet. So we are not limiting that. But we are, because it's the next number up there. So we are in 60-something, 64, 65, and we are getting to 70 million. That's why the number has become important. But in reality, there's no population policy in the UK.
But immigration controls is a population policy. It is restricting people, treating them like numbers, isn't it?
No. It is just a small part of that, right? Population policy is more about that. It's more about fertility, about mortality, about a lot of other things that is not only about migration.
Gawain, Towler, you wanted to come in there.
I quite agree. There is the P.J. O'Rourke example. Yes, okay, you get everybody stacked on top of each other as they are in Manhattan. They still have to feed. And that comes from fields, which take up more space. I think it's a bit trite to suggest that you could whack up the population to that extent. However, I don't think that there's one thing that's been missed out on here. You talked about fertility. There is another key thing. One is the people of this country have never been asked they've never been asked, do you want this number of people coming in? And it's not just that they put pressure on the housing and the water and the schools and all the rest of it. It fundamentally changes the culture of the land. If we're talking 47% of that increase are non-British born, for want of a better term, then this will change the very nature of our society. This may be a good thing, this may be a bad thing, but the people of this country have never been asked, and I think that is important.
So just to be clear, you're advocating, when you say they should have a say, are you advocating a referendum on this
able.
issue?
I'm advocating that as the debate becomes more rational and as we become more reasonable and as we can actually say maybe we should put a slowdown on the levels of immigration, then that becomes part of the political debate rather than the hate debate outside the pub on Friday night at 10 o'clock. And this is a good thing because it is now becoming part of the programme of political parties, where in the past it wasn't.
But we all know that we want more and better services, that we need probably another 1 million homes built. So I don't think we need some sort of survey on what do we want. I agree with you. A referendum would be a great thing on immigration. I'm all for it. You know, even if we lost in the first instance, I think we need that open debate.
So the debate is
and
there.
And we need people need to
that.
absolutely have their say. And I wouldn't hold the public in contempt as politicians do. And I also wouldn't be, you know, that worried about it because I think there's a lot of smart, savvy people out there. And when you put the argument for more and better instead of fewer and having less, which is what this debate's actually about, I think there's huge possibilities there.
We're very nearly out of time, but just one last question to Carlos Vargas-Silva. In terms of the trends and where we're going from here, what are the key migration trends over the next sort of 10, 15 years, and what might change those?
Well, it is very interesting because now you have this policy of 100,000 as a target. And it is likely that the government is not going to hit that target, but it is going to decrease migration to a certain degree. Now, because this policy includes a lot of people, includes everyone, including, for instance, students, which the majority of public may not consider migrants, then it may be the case that in a few years you have a migration of, let's say, 140,000 net migration of 140,000 people in the UK, and still the level of opposition is very high.
Thanks today to my guests, Carlos Vargas-Silva, Gawain Towler and Ceri Dingle. You're listening to The Voice of Russia. Stay with us.